Hello, I'm Tony Gonzalez. I'm an artist, I'm a product designer, and an entrepreneur. I'm one of the founders of One of Tea. That's our store which showcases our designs. I started with paper when I was hired by a friend of mine who was producing paper products. That started me off as a product designer. Later on in my career, I moved and uh, I established a handmade paper mill in Legazpi with my father. So that started the the affair in handmade paper making. It's interesting because little do people know in the Philippines that the Philippines produces 80% of the world's pulp requirements because we have abaca. Abaca has been a traditional um, a product of the Philippines. In fact, during the Spanish times, during when we were still a colony of Spain, there was no ships that would sail that didn't have abaca ropes. Okay, so later on, during the American times, they discovered it that abaca is also a good source to make pulp and to paper. That's why if you notice the story of Manila paper, okay, Manila envelope, right? Because this was made of abaca paper, abaca pulp, or abaca fiber. And also later on, the Japanese also found this earlier, and Japan being the number one paper producing country, or actually part of their culture, was also using abaca aside from adding it to their local kozo, which is the paper mulberry tree, which they used to make paper. So the Japanese had plantations also in the Philippines. So I think that's the reason why paper. Why did the government push 30 years ago uh, to make an industry out of this? Because we have everything already. We already have the raw material. So all we have to do is, learn the skills to make handmade paper. Aside from abaca, um, we also have salago fiber, which is one of the best fibers. Um, these are pulped, and um, this produces a very high grade pulp fiber for to make money paper. So usually, um, a lot of countries, they mix this with abaca to make their money paper. So the US dollars, they have abaca. The British pounds, I think, or the Japanese also. Well, this is one of the main products of abaca also this time. Um, and then we have pineapple, because we have lots of pineapple plantations in the Philippines. So, and this is now what we are developing. It's an agricultural waste, but then people don't realize that the leaves of the pineapple is also very good qualities to make paper. Um, and then of course we have bamboo. I will not mention cannabis, although cannabis is a very good source also of pulp, because it's illegal in the Philippines. But I heard they're growing now um, cannabis plantation in Australia to make paper. So I'm sure in the future, um, more, because there's a need of fiber and pulp. So I think the Philippines is very blessed that we have so many plants that can produce good pulp or good fiber, including bananas. Actually, when we started doing paper, uh, we were exporting most of the paper that we produced. And this is part of designing paper. People always ask me, Tony, how do you design paper? Do you design paper? I said yes. Because when we were starting, we always looked at the Japanese style of paper making, the Japanese quality. So that was our benchmark, and we tried to follow that. Other countries did that also. Maybe after a year of really trying to follow the Japanese way, we found out that it's impossible. It's impossible to make or to follow Japanese paper making techniques or Japanese paper products, handmade paper products, because there's a lot of things that we have to follow. Okay, it's not only just making water and pulp, but Japanese paper is a culture. Okay, so how can you follow centuries of culture? That's why Japanese paper needs a lot of discipline. And number two, it's also about the season. The Philippines, we only have 2 seasons. Japan has 4. And sometimes some paper mills are washing their paper during winter, or their fabric or their fibers during winter, because cold water makes also good pulp. So it depends. So all these things, taking into consideration, we decided, forget about Japanese paper. So that's the time we started to experiment and getting out of the box of what we have learned. And we started putting in some texture. We started putting in some fiber that's not pulp, that's not beaten, to be part of a design of a paper. Sometimes we even throw in wood shavings coming out of the paper. We put some skeletized leaves, we put different kinds of leaves, we put shells, we embedded shells inside the paper. We got some different fibers with different colors and mix it into our paper pulp to create different textures and colors also. And it was quite successful when we started showing it in Europe, using the handmade paper as wrapping sheets. As we made boxes wrapped in our handmade paper. We did lamps. So it took totally, it was an explosion actually. Everybody wanted to have our paper. Later on, even Thailand copied us, India copied us. The best compliment actually came from the Japanese sensei, or the Japanese living legend in handmade paper, when he came to visit us a few years later. And he said that he's so proud of the Philippines that we did not only make Japanese paper, but we created the Philippine paper. Personally, my famous products that I did with paper was the long sheets. When I started my company, that was one of our best-selling products. I made paper like 120 by 240 meters. And it's also good to see that in the last few years also coming up, we have Masa Eco. This is a Japanese style of paper making, and they also became famous for doing these long sheets but on their own style. So you see also the development of these big sheets of paper. Early on my career also in handmade paper, I used to supply Locsin International. They were one of the biggest manufacturers of paper lamps during those times. But now, after many years, you will see that paper as a lamp is still accepted by the market. And one of these is Tess Pasola's design with CDO handmade or indigenous. which did really good sales when they first launched the product in Maison d'Objet in Paris a few years ago. And now this is what the company is doing a lot now, is making paper lamps. Also because now there's a new technology of lighting. Because of the LED, it's easy to use paper lamps because the light source is a cold light, we call a cold light. So it doesn't burn the paper anymore. Not during like 20 years ago. It was very strict that making paper lamps is limited because of all these restrictions against fire, and before there was no LED, so the bulb gets really hot, you know. So now to design a paper lamp is limitless. You can do a lot. So I think there's a lot of future using handmade paper as a shade for lamps. So there's a lot of companies the last few years that have been using this mactan stone, or they would dig it and make use of the mactan coral clay to produce furniture. They produce candle holders. Okay, they produce planters. They produce pillars. One of these companies that I worked for, Nature's Legacy, and it was so funny because when I got to their company, I think they've done it all from classical look to tiles to different kinds of planters. So what we did was, or what I designed actually was, I told the owner, why don't we emboss the words of my favorite song, Imagine? So we did that. We made a vase, maybe 1.20 and 1.50 m, and it became one of their best-selling products actually. But you see, this is what Philippines do offer in terms of what, re-engineering or repurposing a material, okay, or creating something out of nothing, or creating something where people thought that to go beyond the material. One interesting companies who took advantage of this natural disaster was a company named Pumice, and it's so interesting to see how they work with this material. After so many years, the lahar, or this volcanic ash, solidified, and you would see, like in a desert atmosphere or desert location, you would see this company and its people carving blocks of pumice and bringing them to a place where they process this into products, into bowls, into planters, into home accessories, homeware, and even for bath and body products, which became one of their bestseller, making pumice bath stones, and up to now is still selling very well. So this is a nice example also of, I don't know if you call it creativity, or you call it resilience, or you call it how people can find beautiful things out of disaster, or can create jobs, or can create products on a place that was devastated by a volcanic eruption. One very interesting material in the Philippines is kapis. Traditionally, we've been using this for centuries as part of our windows. We do kapis windows for our houses because of the translucency of the material. It's actually a shell which is washed when it dies on the shores of our islands. So actually, it's very abundant. Our craftsmen have used this to make windows, We use this as lamps. We even use this for Christmas when we do our parol, our Christmas lanterns. And later on, in the 70s, it became more popular because very famous designer Werner Pantone made this iconic lamp out of Capiz. And this pushed Capiz to the world market as early as the time. One of the reasons also why the craft flourished, because this was also one of the products or items that the Philippines would sell to our American visitors, because we used to host one of the biggest naval base and Air Force base the Americans have outside of the USA. So every time these servicemen would go back to the US, they would buy all this Capiz stuff to remind them about the Philippines. In the last 30 years, there was a lot of companies also using Capiz as their raw material, but this time they were able to re-engineer the material and was able to laminate it, or they were able to change the color of the material from white to a little bit goldish by smoking it. Some they were also cooking it to make the shell softer so it can follow a form, and to create, of course, if there's a form, there's a function. One of these companies, a very successful company, is Shell Arts, whose company has always been showing since time immemorial in all the Saipem shows, as far as I can remember. And this company is very famous for using Capiz as their main material to make their products. One of the materials that I also like to work with is wicker. Wicker is actually a material that comes also from rattan. Wicker being also very traditional, also part of our culture. Since time immemorial, people has been using this to make things, or really like product design for that they use for their daily lives. Like for example, they make baskets for the mothers to go to the market. Okay, so I can still remember my grandmother. She always has her favorite basket. She wouldn't go to the market without bringing her favorite basket. So again, this is also a nice example of a product, and you can reuse this one. This is made of wicker. Also, our farmers, our fishermen, they use this also to catch fish, making fish traps out of wicker or rattan. This material, wicker, also became very famous because during the 30s, I think, or 20s, some craftsmen or some designers were able to make the famous peacock chair. Okay, so the peacock chair and other kinds of chairs that became famous of that era. I think this was part of the colonial look. Being a colony of America, we did a lot of colonial furniture that they used in their plantation, in their homes, and most of these are wicker. I can say that this is not really endemic in the Philippines because Asia has a lot of wicker also. The only difference, I think, that what we have in the Philippines is our crafts and craftsmen. It is the way how we handle the material. It's the way how we repurpose the material. And we've done a lot of modern furnitures out of this material. Also, our fashion industry, like Zacarias, have been using this material to make bags and a lot more other things related to fashion. So, this is also one of the advantage of us being Filipinos, is our creativity on how we handle this material, or how we repurpose this material to a product. Also, in the Philippines, we have very good weavers or craftsmen who have done so many kinds of different weaves. For me, if I work with these companies, I always get inspired by them, actually. And one of the nice stories about my designs of wicker was when I was going around one factory and I actually saw the back part of what they were weaving. And I told them to stop doing it because I like it. And we made a product that when we weave it, we use the back part, not the front part. In fact, that product became a lamp, a wall lamp, and it won some design awards. And again, this is also how designers also repurpose, how designers working with very good craftsmen comes up with really great designs and nice products. Wicker as a material is actually a forest product. Comes from rattan, and people ask me always about the sustainability of the material. I hope it regenerates itself, and I've heard some companies are also doing replanting of this material and also like selective cutting. But if you talk about sustainability, I remember there used to be so many kinds of weavings. Each region or each province used to have a particular weave for a particular purpose. But slowly, because of industrialization and also there was no need for it, less and less people were doing these weaves, and less people were handing down the crafts to the next generation. But hopefully, with this new trend coming in now, that people are again looking for real products, meaning real material, not anymore plastic, not anymore faux, whatever. So I think the trend now is people are really looking for a natural material, and also that there is somebody behind using this material. And I think the crafts will be coming back, and I'm hopeful that if the market comes back, also this dyeing crafts hopefully will come back too. And I think I have a very strong hunch that this is the future. I think the main advantage of us here is we know how to bring it forward. That's the difference between Philippine designers or Philippine craftsmen looking at the world market or looking at what the market needs. Actually, the Filipinos are very good in that. We know how to move it forward. We know how we can repurpose, how we can redesign using these traditional materials and bring it to the future. And I think that's one of the things I saw. Not only me, but I think also sometimes I go around with some buyers, and because sometimes they ask me to design for them, and I had the chance to be able to really see what the other countries are doing when I go there. Another advantage is our craftsmen, our weavers, all these people working with this material, their minds are not close to tradition. That's why for me as a designer, it's very easy for me to work with Filipino craftsmen. Because if I ask them to do something out of the box or something different, they do not hesitate to do it. Being a creative person also in them, they are not stuck in tradition. They move on. That's why a lot of buyers come here because they know that we can interpret things that they want. And that's the difference between Philippine products or Philippine manufacturers or Philippine craftsmen, designers, compared to our Asian competitors or neighbors. I think that's also why Um, one of the reasons why we are in the forefront of making trends or making new designs. That's also the reason why it's easy for us to repurpose, reuse, or rethink these materials and adapt it to our present world, or a present situation, or a present market, or even the future market.